College football nerds here talking Michigan and Ohio State, the game. Always huge every year, and it is huge this week. Want to apologize. We got these out a little later this week than we planned. I've got kids at home for Thanksgiving week, and it's hard getting stuff done. And Josh is on vacation, as you can see. Josh, let's talk about this game. I am going to admit up front that my previous years of confidently picking this game and being embarrassingly wrong has got me not wanting to say the things that I want to say or pick the way that I want to pick because I don't know how to pick this game anymore.
Yeah, I feel like no matter what we've done the last few years, we've been wrong. And I think if you asked either side, all we've done is pick the other team. I'm pretty confident in that. We've never picked either team correctly, even when we both pick different sides. And that's almost not a joke, Daniel. I mean, I feel like we just cannot get this game right. And so, it's tough because this one in particular, it feels like the two teams are in different places. And there have been times the last few years where Michigan's been on an upswing and you felt like, okay, but Ohio State's also good. They'll get them. Last year, it felt like, okay, Ohio State's a lot better. Michigan is definitely not the team they were 2 years ago. Still lose the game. This year, it feels even more so, Daniel, right? Like Ohio State went into that game with a loss. I think people forget the regular season, second half of the season, they seem very mortal. And then they, go into the Michigan game. You feel like Michigan was down. They were still going to win. They lose that game. And now it feels ridiculous that more than anything that Michigan won to a large extent if you watch what Ohio State did in the postseason. So the whole idea of a rivalry game being unpredictable, I think, is certainly a thing. And beyond that, I think there's some particular matchup issues, points in the schedule, different things that have come into play. And yeah, Daniel, I mean, I feel at this point, after about 5 years of struggling with this prediction, I just have no idea how to predict it.
Yeah, and the thing is, um, last year was completely unpredictable. You had 13 or 10 of Michigan's 13 points came on a 4-play 3-yard drive and a 2-play 2-yard drive. And it was just super weird. It was one of those shortened games that anything can happen sort of thing. But it's funny because you say we've always said you and me both on this channel that rivalry games usually pan out the way that the data suggests that they will. And that's tough here because it hasn't been the case the last few years. But looking at the specific matchups in this game, I'm excited because while Michigan doesn't have the same defense they had last year, they still have one of the better defenses in the Big Ten. They have a solid defense that's enough to give this Ohio State offense a bit of a challenge. I do think that they were doing load management last week. They didn't need their best players, so they sat some of their best players. But Josh, do you think, one of the things we've been saying is we want to see Sayin in this passing offense face a really good defense, not so much that we don't think they can compete against a good passing defense, but that we want Ohio State to have those mental reps before they get into a playoffs and see a really elite defense. Is this Michigan defense, while not as good as they have been, a good enough primer for that?
I think Michigan's probably a much better primer. You can go to collegefootballnerds.com and check out our statistics. We do those statistics with something called relative performance. So we look at how you did versus other teams, how they did against everyone else. We don't use priors. We don't use recruiting rankings. It's not biased towards any particular conference, even though I think everybody's going to find some reason to dislike them. But in those rankings, Michigan is the only top 15 pass defense that they faced, at least in yards per attempt. And the second best would be Washington, who is at 19th. It's worth noting Ohio State versus Washington, 7.4 yards per, 2 touchdowns, only threw for 208 yards. Now, that was early in the season. The other thing about that game, though, that's a little notable, one, Washington couldn't move the ball. That may or may not be something of note in this game. The other thing is that Ohio State did actually run the ball pretty well. And one big difference between Michigan and Washington is Michigan's a top 10 rush defense. We have them ninth in our model. Washington really is not. They're 28th. And I think, Daniel, this is something we talk about a lot, but maybe not as much as we should. When you start dealing with units that are good in one area but not good in the other. If you're struggling to stop the run, you're going to compromise yourself against the pass and vice versa. When you're really good at both run and pass, it gets a lot harder for a team to leverage one or the other one dimensionally. And the reason is, Michigan can probably play the run versus Ohio State, whose big weakness this year really has been a pretty mediocre run game at times, and play with a light box, do well enough against the run and help out their pass defense. Do trap coverages. They can drop linebackers into throwing lanes to try to take away easy throws, make the plays take longer, dedicate extra guys to the pass rush, yada yada. I don't think, Daniel, that Washington could quite do that, at least not on the level Michigan can. And to your point, we discussed this at one point in terms of FEI defenses. I mean, Ohio State from here on out the rest of the season is probably going to play something like 4, 5 top 20, top 25 FEI defenses. And, to this point, they really haven't played any. And so, when you're coming into a situation where, depending on how you want to look at it, maybe Washington's the best defense you faced, Wisconsin's probably second best or 21st, but they're really lackluster in terms of pass defense. FEI has Washington 34th overall. And now you've got to play some defenses that are a lot better. Michigan's still 29th in the middle of that. But again, Wisconsin is so one-dimensionally good versus the pass, or good versus the run and not good against the pass. It wasn't a big deal. That starts prepping you for games where, Texas Tech is number 2, Indiana is number 3 in defense, Oklahoma's 4, Notre Dame's 5, all Oregon, 6. You're going to be facing some top-notch elite defenses through the Big Ten championship game and the playoff. It's going to happen. People can complain about weak schedules. Look, that doesn't matter. Ohio State's going to play those games, but this is a tune-up game and an experience to get data points for Ohio State playing a little bit of a higher level competition, I think, in terms of balanced defensive performance to get them ready for what, Daniel, and I don't know if you agree with this, could almost be a jarring step forward going into the playoffs against much, much better defenses than they've had to face that are probably going to stress them or take away things that the teams they played haven't been able to do.
On one hand, I agree with you. On the other hand, I think that ending with Michigan and the Big Ten championship game are great primers for that. Ohio State could lose both those games, still make the playoffs. They're not going to lose both those games. I'm not saying that. Y'all don't come at me. But what I'm saying is they have a lot of breathing room to stub their toe or have some slip ups here and still be perfectly set up in the playoffs. This is kind of what happened, I think, last year. Although I think sitting at home for the Big Ten championship game actually helped them a little bit there too, in that Michigan exposed a lot of those things for them, and that they had plenty of time to work on those things and get ready for playoff time. Josh, it's funny. You said tune-up game. Michigan fans are going to come at you. The spirit of what you're saying is true.
Yeah,
they need a
not saying that Michigan is just a light tune-up game. That's not my point. I mean, it's a game to get adjusted, right? It's a game to figure out what you
right.
are.
Well, and it's the first defense of this caliber really that they've seen. We thought it was going to be Texas, and it turns out Texas' defense is actually pretty bad. And that's, again, not a knock on Ohio State. We are very, we're consistent on this channel and saying, we're not saying, oh, you only scored 14 against Texas in the opener, and Florida scored this many, Georgia scored this many. It's the opener. It's a completely different situation. But what I'm saying is this is the first real defense that they're facing, and it's a good one. When Haynes went down, we thought Michigan was maybe going to really struggle, but Marshall's come in and really torn it up. So I think that on the offensive side, there are also some things that they're going to test Ohio State with, especially elite run games. But Josh, this is interesting to me because when we were talking about Georgia and Texas, one of the things I pointed out was Georgia and Texas have 4 or 5 common opponents, and Georgia did better offensively and defensively and on the scoreboard in every single one of them relative to how Texas did against those opponents. We're not doing transitive property here, but one, it's wild to me that Michigan and Ohio State, if I'm looking at this right, I think they only have 3 common opponents. They share a conference. They have 9 conference games. They have 3 common opponents. This is we could do a whole other episode on why this is absolutely crazy and an indictment on mega super conferences. Conferences should be like 10 teams and that's it. But that's another topic for another day. Josh, can we glean anything from the fact that um, there's been some real struggles in those comparative games and, ugly win against Wisconsin, ugly win against Purdue. Can we glean anything from that? I mean, I'm not hurting them so much for the Northwestern game because that was weird turnovers. They produced more, Michigan did, than the score indicated. But some of those others might be a canary in the coal mine.
I think so. I mean, I think there's something to it. I mean, Ohio State didn't necessarily just absolutely run over all these teams 60 to nothing either, but they certainly had an easier time. Like Wisconsin 34 nothing, a little bit of a little bit of a maybe misnomer or score misnomer, however you want to put it, compared to 24-10. They got that 34 a lot easier. I do want to take a note too. You talked about Texas's defense not being very good, and people are going to take exception to that. But the reality for that was Texas was, again, sort of one-dimensional. We have them seventh against the run. They're 47th against the pass. It's sort of the similar situation in Wisconsin. They're better than Wisconsin defensively, but they're similar. And Daniel, I bring that up again because I think that's the important part with Michigan. Michigan, as a team, offensively, not real great. I think most Michigan fans understand that. But they're fifth in our metrics, the number 5 opponent and adjusted rush offense in the country. We have them 57th passing, 5th rushing. They're not a terrible run team. The problem with some of these teams they've played, like Wisconsin in particular, Wisconsin is an excellent run defense. They're just a terrible pass defense. And again, those splits, it was like 47 and something for Texas. We have them 59th and 10th. 59th against the pass, 10th against the run. Um, I think Michigan really depends on matchups because they are so limited throwing the football right now. The problem with that, you face a Ohio State team that's first against the pass, 8th against the run. But even there, Daniel, in those opponent adjusted statistics, I mean, Ohio State against the run is not all that different from Wisconsin, right? 8th versus 10th. And I don't think that's crazy. Maybe Ohio State fans will take offense. I know Reese has been phenomenal. Styles is phenomenal. I get it. Look, guys, that Wisconsin defense, their front seven, the ability to defend the run is elite. Like
It's really
they're
good.
they're elite.
Yeah.
They don't have the athleticism to go sideline to sideline. They struggle with basic concepts in the passing game. Their zone defense is way too loose because of the lack of athleticism, and just flat out the secondary isn't very good. And that makes them get compromised in a lot of ways. And over the course of the game, they have to break themselves to defend the width of the field. But against the run, they're very good. And Michigan struggled with that. They're probably going to struggle with Ohio State the same way. The question is, can Ohio State out leverage it? And Daniel, I'll turn sort of the other thing around. The problem right now with a lot of these games is, like in Wisconsin's case, they're also one-dimensional offensively. And so Ohio State being able to really load up on the run game meant Wisconsin didn't really have any alternative. And look, I know Michigan doesn't throw the ball well, but we have a Wisconsin 104th. Michigan straight up half that number about it, 57th. They're a lot better than Wisconsin throwing the football. It's hard not to be. And so I don't think you take a ton away, but I think you have to take something away. And Daniel, maybe this is a point to get into maybe a few more nuanced points with who these teams are. We started the year by kind of questioning the way in which Ohio State was running their offense. They weren't throwing the ball downfield hardly at all. And then it kind of got mocked because about mid-season, Ohio State started really opening up their offense, throwing the ball down a lot to now they're one of the top, offenses in the country in downfield passing. But in doing that, I think it showed their ability to get vertical. I think it also showed the fact that defenses were really straining to defend Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. As of this recording, and last I've heard, Daniel, I haven't heard any solid updates on Carnell Tate. Sounds like Smith's going to play. Have you heard any real solid injury updates on that front?
Have not.
I mean, my assumption is that Smith will play and that Tate is a lot more questionable, just by the way they've handled things the um, last few weeks. But their sort of get right games, Wisconsin was one, Penn State was another, Purdue, and then UCLA, they went back to 6.4 per. Even Rutgers, 8 yards per attempt, only 14 completions, 176 passing. And for the first time since the opener against Texas, they were a sub 65% passing team. Daniel, I saw some signs there versus Rutgers. Rutgers was able to play Ohio State defensively a lot more neutrally than other teams have. Everybody else is playing a bit on their heels. They are terrified of Jeremiah Smith going over the top because nobody can defend him one-on-one downfield. We kind of questioned the way that they floated the ball, in the deep ball. I think that was misguided in retrospect because you've got guys that are just phenomenal at making those 50-50 catches. Tate versus Texas did it early. Smith's just done it his whole career, but certainly this season, Tate's continued to do it. I don't think anybody has an answer for those guys if they're one-on-one. So they've got to play cloud coverage on the back end. They've got to do cover three, cover four, and mix it. Stay on their, I'm still amazed, like with Minnesota, how bad Minnesota was. If they were to cover three or cover four and they got run by flat footed, that should not happen. Even against guys that are superior athletes, that shouldn't happen. That was pretty bad. But beyond that, teams are still really having a strain. The thing that happened with Rutgers is they weren't as terrified versus Ennis and some of those other guys. Smith played earlier in that game. And without those guys on the field, they played more traditional pass defense and they were a lot more effective. And I do think Sayin had more issues because the timing was a little harder, the windows were harder, guys were not, Smith and Tate, they're given so much cushion that they're able to get free releases. And I think something people underestimate with a quarterback position, like throwing the deep ball, the hardest part of the deep ball, it's not really just throwing to a target downfield. Most all high level quarterbacks can do that. And in fact, I've talked to a lot of quarterback coaches that say the deep ball is the easiest pass to throw. The hard part with the deep ball is adjusting to the fact that good defenses are going to reroute your receivers. They're not going to let him run to the mark that he has at the time when he's supposed to run it. And so being able to anticipate how they're going to bend routes and what the redirection is and the difference in timing in order to place the ball at the right spot, that's the hard part. And against high level pass defenses, you have to always kind of overcompensate and overthrow it generally, because an underthrown ball generally is an advantage to the safeties if you're throwing the deep ball or at least the coverage downfield. Tate and Smith, people were too terrified to actually try to redirect them because they would just get run by and blown by. And they're so good at jump balls that underthrowing it wasn't such a big deal that they could kind of operate the offense differently. I'm not sure how much losing one or two of those guys is going to matter. Again, against a pass defense that I think is better. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Sayin. I think he's proven me wrong on the deep ball all year. They haven't done a lot of intermediate seam stuff. Think he's one of the best throwers within 15 yards in football, which people might want to poo-poo as a minor thing, but it's absolutely not. I mean, most quarterbacks cannot throw 90+% accuracy against air, much less against a live team at that. You have to be incredibly good at your ball placement and consistency and timing and everything else. But this is the kind of thing where it comes in to say, okay, well, if you're missing these two guys, are you going to be able against a high level pass defense to work the field, work progressions, maybe throw the ball on those deep hooks and curls and do it with timing against a pass rush? I still don't know if they even need to, but I think it's more of a question. And so, Daniel, if I were to find an area where Michigan maybe could do some things we haven't seen, that would be it. One, I'm just not sure that, again, that they need to or that they're even still going to have trouble. And two, I'm not sure Michigan is going to have the offense to press them to have to do it, even if they're having trouble with it, they may not even feel like they need to try. So maybe I'll let you start with the first one. I mean, do you have any concerns with Michigan's defense and any sort of latent issues? And two, do you think Michigan's offense is good enough to really strain them?
I think Ohio State's probably going to get theirs. I don't think that it's going to be as comfortable offensively as Ohio State fans want it to be, because what they want is, hey, we're better on both sides of the ball than Michigan. We deserve to have one of these games, not only that we win, but we win comfortably and we don't have to be stressing in the fourth quarter. But the issue for me is on the flip side of the ball. Michigan has shown, especially its quarterback, Bryce Underwood has shown that he's not there yet. I'm long on Bryce Underwood. I think he's going to be fantastic, but I think it's going to need another offseason of first-team reps and probably another season of really getting comfortable with what he's good at and where he needs work. If you look at the worst QBR game for Sayin this year, it was against Texas, which makes sense. Opening game, he's first-time starter. They did hold him back in a lot of ways. 68 QBR. Bryce Underwood has had 7 games worse than that this year. And one of them was just a few weeks ago against Purdue. That to me is, just trying to be objective. That to me is kind of a smoking gun. We've got one quarterback who may not hit his ceiling against a really good defense, but he's going to get enough to get the points that they need to win. On the other side of the ball, I don't think that Michigan's offense right now is there at the quarterback position that they're going to be able to keep pace, even if the run game is there. I think Bryce Underwood is going to get some chunk plays, and I think the run game is going to get some chunk plays, but it's not going to be enough. I'm going to give my score, and then you can go ahead and maybe dip in the model and give me your score as well. I've got Ohio State winning this one 28, Michigan 17. Give me some thoughts.
I agree with you. I mean, ultimately, the issue is Bryce Underwood in that offense. And, Daniel, be it Marsh or Morgan, my bigger concern with Michigan offensively is I don't know that they have the horses at the receiver position. And football, particularly in college, has become a receiver-dominated game for some time. And we talked about even dating like 2018, 2019, 2020, those teams that running for national titles. What did they do it on the back of, right? I mean, they did it on the back of T. Higgins, Justin Ross, who ended up having a serious injury. Uh, this guy named Jamar Chase and another guy named Jefferson ended up being pretty good in the NFL for LSU. Next year, Alabama had Devontae Smith. They also had Mechie. Then 2021, on one hand, you had Jamison Williams and Mechie, and they were the receiving duo. And then Georgia had these two guys that were okay called Lad McConkey and Brock Bowers. Turns out they were pretty good too. So if you go back and look at it, all the teams that have really been highly successful, with the exception really solely of that 2023 Michigan team, they've all had multiple high-level receivers. They've all had first-round draft picks, usually multiple first-round draft picks, the receiver position, and they've really carried the offense. I think Bryce Underwood's going to be really good. Now, I question whether really good in this context is going to be, you know, like absolute first round draft pick next year, or if he's going to be a guy that slowly develops into it. The tool set's there, the arm velocity's there, the ability to throw off angle, all those things. I think his ability to process things as they're happening, though, is still a little bit limited. He's not quite there yet. But more important to me is I don't know that they have receivers to create separation. And when you look at the model, what I think, turning to that, what I find interesting, it has a game 31-11, so definitely a lopsided affair. The yards per play is not actually that different, Daniel. It's 5.1 yards per play to 4.4. Passing is a big differential of about 7.3 to 5.2. Neither team can run well, 3.3 to 3.8. I note the consistency score, Daniel, for Ohio State right now is sitting at 10.7, which is non-existent. Basically, our model is saying that it can't figure out Ohio State, and that probably has a lot to do with them throttling up and down from competition. Michigan's not that different. But the problem is just that, when you're in that like 4 to 5 point range, we called it for a long time stall points. I think Josh Pate took the concept and called it a freeze point. Friend of the show. I mean, you took it from good faith from us talking back and forth a lot offline. You hit this point where the offense just sort of sputters. And the thing that gets really hard to project is how close you are to that line and also what happens when you hit it. Because Michigan, the thing that made them win in a number of those games, right, was they hit big time run plays for chunk yardage for touchdowns. And we would often talk about how it wasn't sustainable to do that. They've done it most of this year, particularly when Justice Haynes was in the lineup. They would hit these huge chunk plays for 60, 70-yard touchdowns. Corum did it, Donovan Edwards did it. And that was a big driver to their scoring, even when the offense wasn't being overly successful. Last year, they beat Ohio State really without that. I don't know if it's back this year because they've had those kind of plays in the run game, but without the sort of talent that I think you need at receiver, I have a hard time seeing it. And I have a hard time seeing it against this Ohio State defense. So the model has this 31-11. I'll shave it down a little bit, Daniel. I'm going to say Ohio State 28, Michigan 10. I mean, I think there are too many red flags on the offensive side of the ball that Michigan's not going to move it that well. And a big difference is, at the quarterback position, I just have real concerns about what's going to happen if you're in a situation where you've got to win with Bryce Underwood and you end up throwing the ball a lot. Like, I don't think the game is going to be an 18-point game in terms of the middle of the third quarter. It just, To me, Daniel, this feels like one of those games where Michigan's going to get in a situation where they've got to come back. And if they have to press, and we've seen this a little bit from Underwood, I don't know that he's developmentally at the point where he can press against a high level defense and not turn a close game into a blowout, which is a thing that happens. But with this said, the spread currently 10 points to Ohio State, over under 44 and a half. I'm a little under, a little past the spread. This game is really projected, if you want to think it think of it in this way, right, to be something like 27-20, Daniel. And I do find that interesting, and maybe that's something to end on, is that the point spread's really not that high. I mean, if you look at the overall power ratings, projections of these teams, and we already said in ours, it's pretty stark. We have Ohio State far and away the number one team in the country. Michigan, I'm going to scroll, they're 16th. And that's high, but it's not that high. FEI, I know they have Ohio State. Well, they actually have them number two behind Indiana, which I disagree with, but we could have a longer conversation. It's not Brian Fremeau's problem. It's not even the math's problem. It's an issue with how Indiana scales, but that's a different story, different day. Michigan's at 19th. This feels like more of a gap than the computers think. The computers think Ohio State's playing a top 20 overall quality team. In the computer's mind, Ohio State number two, they've played Texas, who's number 21, and Washington, who's number 17, and then Michigan is right between the two at number 19 as the toughest games they've played all year. I don't think as an observer it feels that way. It feels like it's more lopsided. And Daniel, maybe the last question I'll flip to you, is there something to be said that collectively that all of us are kind of undercounting Michigan, right? I mean, they have the one loss where they lost pretty badly at USC, the loss early to an Oklahoma team that is probably going to be in the playoffs, and as it turns out, is an absolutely phenomenal defense. And outside that, yeah, they've had some struggle wins because the offense can't put up a lot of points, but the defense isn't getting up a lot of points either. And are we really just kind of undercounting the fact that they're good defensively, the fact that they've been winning games? Or, is the gap that large? And if the gap is that large, how much of that is just due to how good we perceive Ohio State to be?
Well, the problem is Michigan hasn't played a single offense that scales against a good defense except for USC, and they gave up 31 points. Oklahoma's offense actually isn't particularly good. And that's why, I'm going to go on record now. If Oklahoma makes it in the playoffs, I don't expect them to win. I'll be shocked if they win more than one game. I probably wouldn't pick them to win one game. Their offense is not good. It's a problem.
I mean,
And
Alabama outgained them 2-1. It's not a light thing to say that, if they play that game again, Alabama probably wins that game 8 out of 10 times, bluntly. And it's just,
and even the Missouri game, they had 17 points, and I think their two touchdowns were on super short fields after turnovers. All that to say, Michigan has put up a good defensive performance this year, but it's also hard to truly contextualize it because just like it's hard to scale or judge in our model, like how Indiana nukes these really bad teams, and then they play a decent team and it's really tight and it's weird, but they still rank really high. Michigan has the same thing relative to the offenses they're playing. It's hard for computers to suss out what 20 points versus Maryland means, what 16 points versus Purdue, or 20 points versus Michigan State. It's hard because those teams aren't scoring more than 16 and 20 points on even bad defenses. So that's tough for me. I think that this is a game that should go the way it should go. And if you take the logos off and say, here's the two profiles for these teams, the point spread is closer to like 14 or 16, and nobody is hand-wringing over picking this game, yet here we are because of what has happened in the past.
yeah, I think so. And that last point is the real point because Michigan's had their number, even when it feels like they shouldn't have their number. And Daniel, it's so hard for me to wrap my head around because I'm such a logic analytics guy, and frankly, I think I get blinded sometimes to the other aspects of the sport. I don't even think it's a matchup thing necessarily. Like I just struggle so much to explain it. But I will try to put try to put forward a theory, Daniel. we talk a lot about Ohio State and their scheduling, not being their fault because they try to schedule well out of conference, and two, not meaning they're a bad team because you can be elite and have a bad schedule. 2018 Clemson was a dominant team and had a terrible schedule, and that's one of the reasons they came out of nowhere is they blew out teams all year, but everybody knew the schedule sucked, and so they got discounted. 2014 Ohio State, after that Virginia Tech loss, blew out everybody all year. I think people forget that team's schedule really was pretty rough. It was not a good schedule, and they were dominant, and everybody discounted them. Oh, Big Ten sucks, SEC's great, and they came out and blew the doors off people. And the key there, it's not a conference versus conference thing. Like you can be an elite team with a bad schedule because of the conference being down or because you don't get the right draws. In this case, Ohio State just doesn't have the tougher draws. Doesn't mean they're a bad team. But I do think, Daniel, too often they've gone into the Michigan game with Michigan presenting hurdles, freeze points, stall points, matchup issues that they haven't been presented with. And last year's Ohio State team never really tried to throw the ball vertically through really the whole season, especially the second half of the season. And they got more and more tight offensively in terms of play calling. It's been a criticism of sometimes of Ryan Day. To the extent that people feel like I've been critical of the passing game, understand it's because of that history that they've gone into games like this and they haven't stressed themselves enough downfield. I made comparisons to Georgia with Jake Fromm. They get to the national title, they have to really throw with Jake Fromm. They can't do it in crunch time against Alabama, lose the national title. Those are not the situations you want to be in. And yeah, they've been highly efficient. And the thing is, they've been opening the offense up, which relieves a lot of my concern. But I do think it's probably a little bit of a lesson learned because it wasn't until the playoffs last year that they realized we need to throw the ball vertically because we have some of the best vertical threat receivers and the best vertical threat receiver in the country. And most teams can't defend him, especially one on one. And if you just give him a chance, he'll humiliate you. And too often they didn't give him a chance and throw a 50-50 ball. I think they've learned a lot on that. And I think assuming the guys are healthy, they're going to give more of those opportunities. But Daniel, the big thing I worry about, one, it's not partly the scheduling issue again, that maybe Michigan presents some unique problems, though I'm not sure 100% how true that is, but probably I think they're better in pass defense than anyone they've played, all told. Um, but the second issue is, do you think Ohio State plays it tight? Because when you say playing it tight, it's playing not to make mistakes. But when you play not to make mistakes and you're not throwing the ball vertically, you become predictable, you become defendable schematically. And if Ohio State reverts to the kind of game they played against Texas, I don't know that there's that big a gap between Michigan and Texas. Somebody's going to get furious at that statement, especially with the Oklahoma transitive win. Look, there's a lot to say about Oklahoma in those two games, and Oklahoma and Mateer come back from injury, whatever. I don't know that the gap is that big, but I think Ohio State has really distanced themselves from the team they were in week one. And we say, look, you got to throw out the Texas game in every which way and form because the offense wasn't great versus Texas, but also it was week one. And so I don't want to hear how you played a great defense in Texas because you didn't move the ball well, but I'm also not going to tell you that your offense was terrible in that game. But now you've come what I think is a very long way. And do you actually stay with that level of aggression that's made you improve? Or do you play the short passing game, timid offense, not trying to take shots downfield that you did against Texas? Because that was a one-score game for a reason, even though Ohio State's a much better team. And that's the game that they've played with Michigan. And when you play it that tight, it does mean that one pick six can be enough to lose the football game. And Daniel, I mean, I'd like to think that Ohio State has learned those lessons, but maybe they haven't because they've been having these problems for years.
Well, they have had introduced verticality in their game, but they also have done a thing to their credit because they can, because they're good enough, and that's exercised tremendous game control. And they're not trying to score a lot of points and they're not trying to get a lot of possessions, which is perfect if you know you can win, like the idea of load management, like the idea of working on certain things, but slow playing the game, limiting possessions, which also helps your defense. You know, that is all great. And if they can do that here, that is great. But I think what you'll notice in Ohio State, if they don't score early or if it's kind of tight early, they won't go with the game control thing because that benefits Michigan. The fewer possessions you have, the less likely your superiority as a team, as a roster, as a coaching staff, or whatever the fewer opportunities you have for that to really take over. The deeper you get into these games, that's when you see underdogs start to lose control of games and the better teams start coming back, and it's because of that. And Ohio State's going to want to, I think, limit that. They don't want to give that gift to Michigan by making the game too short. All right, let us know in the comments what you think this score is going to be, and if we're wrong for being overly influenced by recent past and getting things wrong in this game, because I know you've gotten it wrong too. Let us know what you think. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great and wonderful happy Thanksgiving, and God bless.